Canon just dropped their R6 V, and as a Sony user, I have a couple of thoughts. And yes, that is a Canon shirt. I'm starting to feel a little bit betrayed by Sony, and I'll explain it a bit. Canon 7K RAW open gate. Now, to be fair, people are gonna say, "Oh, well, who's gonna be using RAW?" And you're right. I'll give Sony the win there in terms of the fact that they still use XAVC-SI, which is a compression format that has a lot of high quality embedded into it. But Canon does use ProRes RAW internally, again. And for it to be using ProRes RAW, if you have a Mac, is going to handle that like butter. Because again, ProRes is built by Apple. Apple can decode that way much easier than you can decode RAW on anything, unless you have a supercomputer. So the next point, megapixel count, they're identical. 32.5, 33. Your 0.5, not going to make a difference. So one thing that I will say is that Sony does have on something like the FX2, which is what I'm shooting this on, is a mechanical shutter. But I've shot with cameras that don't have mechanical shutter. And again, for what I do is mostly portraitures. And for something like that, I don't really think you need the mechanical shutter. I've shot with video lights and it's done perfect, right? There's not much of a challenge there. And so it's getting harder for me to sit here and defend Sony. And I think where I'm coming from is the fact that I used to be a Canon user and I left them because they were lacking innovation. And now it feels like I came to Sony when they were doing good, and now it feels like they're lacking innovation. So I'm a little bit frustrated with the fact is because again, Canon is innovating. R6 Mark III, the R6 V, and whatever else they're going to announce, which might be the R5 Mark III or whatever it is, which is going to compete with their R6 for Sony. I will give them props there. Moving on from resolution, let's talk about memory. Right, you're going to be using CF Express Type B, which for Canon, they've been using that for a long time. So if let's say you were a Nikon shooter, they were using CF Express Type B. If you were shooting Red, you were using CF Express Type B. For whatever reason, Sony decided, hey, we're going to be quirky, we're going to be different. Let's use CF Express Type A. And so now they're still using that with a caveat that they're no longer going to be producing that because of memory shortage. So that's great, right? Using memory that isn't really readily available for you to buy from the manufacturer. Now, yeah, you can go buy, an aftermarket and spend $1,000 because those are the prices now. Yeah, and it seems like Canon was going with reliable, and Sony, that's one bone that I have to pick with them. Because again, how is it that you're going to offer a special kind of media and then you're no longer going to produce that media? I know it's not your fault because of memory shortage, cool, whatever, but you could have at least went with CF Express Type B. And that's just my take. Again, I don't really know how it works when you're in their shoes, right? But next point I want to talk about is lenses, right? G Master series. When you look at the 24-70 on a Canon, is IS, image stabilized, right? And when you look at a Sony, which is their next iteration of their G Master series for the 24-70 Mark II, right? They don't have image stabilization. Oh, well, you have image stabilization in the body. Yes, but you have to crop in. And so if you had image stabilization on the lens, that would be less for you to crop in because, yeah, sure, you might be using both hand in hand. That's less of a crop in. When I use enhanced IS with the FX2, it's a big crop. And then if you're going to be using 60 FPS, that's even a larger crop. Which, to be honest, that's one thing that's always upset me about this is the fact that this camera was released just last year, has a price tag of $200 more than the R6 V, right? And it still has crop 60 frames a second. It sucks because as a Sony user, it feels like they're doing the same rinse and repeat cycle again, and they're overcharging for it, for one, because the Sony FX2 has the same sensor as the A7C Mark II. This is the same exact camera as that, just without a fan. It has the AI integration, same thing that this has. Now, we'll say, well, I don't know if the chipset is a little bit different, if that's newer or whatever it is. I think they're practically the same. Only thing is that with this, you don't get the color science that you do for the Cinema Alta. And when they first released this camera, actually, they had talked about it as a viewfinder for directors that were using Cinema Alta cameras. So imagine that. We're going to make a $2,700 viewfinder. And so, again, with the rinse and repeat cycle, it wasn't just the FX2 with the A7 IV, with the A7C Mark II, using that same sensor, using the same internals. And I can tell it's the same internals because I don't even have two CF Express Type A slots. Not that it would matter, but the FX30, a much budget camera than this that doesn't have full frame, has two Type A slots. And coming onto this camera that was released last year, right, doesn't have two slots for that CF Express Type A. And so that to me is just like, that's crazy. Like, you just use the same internals that you did for the A7 IV and then just rebodied it, rehoused it, put a fan on it, and then changed the color signs of the image. Okay, cool. But that wasn't the only rehousing they did. They rehoused the A7S Mark III to the FX3. And so, again, just they have the mentality, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And I get it, right? I get it. As a company, you have to make money. But to rebrand your products and just keep re-releasing them, it gets old, right? I know you guys are going to make certain things of saying like, oh, well, the A7C Mark II is basically the answer to travelers. And yes, you're right. But to make a whole entire new camera with the same sensor, I feel like you could have at least innovated just a bit. Even if it wasn't like huge, right? Just a bit. Like, hey, you know what? On this one, we're going to offer 60 frames, not cropped. And then on the new FX2, which to be honest, I feel like they should have used the sensor that they did for the A7 V on an FX2, especially for it being just last year's release. 2021 was the release date of the A7 IV, which was the birth of this sensor in this camera. 4 years down the line and they're still using the same sensor. Again, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. I get it. But there has to be some innovation. Even like, I think the biggest drawback for this camera was the fact that they didn't do full frame 60 frames a second. And to be honest, I feel like they should have added the sensor that they have in the A7 V into this camera, and I feel like that should have been their first camera to the next step. That's just my take. Now, it does meet my needs, and I love the camera. The camera is amazing. Sony is amazing. Now, they have released their Sony A7 R6, and I will say, pretty good. For the future of Sony, they're going to start to redeem themselves, and I really hope so. That bigger battery on that R6 is going to say a lot for the FX series, like the 3. Once they update that model, I really hope that they're going to have that bigger size battery, because if they don't, at that point, I don't even know what Sony's doing. So hopefully they're going to redeem themselves. Canon R6, phenomenal camera on paper. I haven't tried it. I can't say, right, what the experience is like. But I've used Canon products enough to know that it's going to be a phenomenal experience regardless. And at the end of the day, I love all cameras. And I know people are going to say that, oh, well, a camera's a camera, use the one that is going to be for the job that you need. Which I 100% agree, right? I agree with that. But hopefully Sony decides to switch it up, finally upgrade, and not be stagnant, right? But anyways, those are my thoughts. Canon, you're doing great. Sony, do just a bit better. But anyways, peace out. See you in the next video.